President and CEO of C.O.nxt. I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves to our audience today, starting with Joe.
Hello, I'm Joe Heppy, the executive chef of ID Restaurant and the Delafield Hotel in Delafield, Wisconsin.
And then Jeff.
Hi, I'm an associate professor at Washington State University. I've been working on kind of immigration and labor issues from a research perspective since about 2008 when I got my master's degree at the University of Idaho.
Hi, my name is Adam Srofe, and I'm the Director of Employee and Labor Relations for Pacific Coast Producers based in Lodi, California. My employer is an agricultural cooperative of over 160 tomato and fruit growers here in California.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to just start off with a question about how the labor shortage that we have all been experiencing throughout the last year and a half especially has affected your businesses, for Joe and Adam. And for Jeff, if you can just chime in with kind of some thoughts on where the research has been taking and what it looks like for us.
Sure.
So we'll start with Joe.
Sure. So these past 2 years have kind of been a roller coaster as far as the labor shortage has gone, where we've seen an increase of higher level labor force that kind of returned, I would say, right around the turn of the end of last year. We saw a lot of people returning to Delafield, Wisconsin area, Milwaukee metropolitan, from larger markets where we were able to kind of capture that talent base that were kind of returning because of some of the COVID shutdowns. That kind of has eliminated. We're not seeing that anymore right now. We're seeing a lot of inexperienced and lower level employees, if any, that are applying, where the people that had that more higher level experience that kind of came back from that COVID initial lockdown, they went on to other positions of higher level. So I was able to acquire high talent that I might not have had those high talent positions for, but they were willing to take lower level positions and really help our business out quite a bit. And then that quickly dissipated into very minimal resumes coming in, and we've had to adapt a lot from our menu design to kind of the skill level that we're looking for on some of our original menus.
That's great. So let's hear a little bit more from Adam on production side of things.
Sure. So my employer, like a lot of food manufacturing, is based on a lot of long-standing traditions as far as operating, and in addition to labor cost concerns, we have other things to account for. We can some products, and so we have to account for steel, and as well as energy and water and ingredients and all of these factors. And so traditionally we've been an extremely lean organization. That's, again, not uncommon in the food manufacturing sector. And so kind of what's happened here, I think, from my perspective with the pandemic, is it's accelerated some trends and things that we already saw approaching. And that includes having to invest in, or allocate certain available capital into technologies that will allow us to automate functions that we can no longer staff, and just out of sheer necessity. And whereas those functions previously we had the labor to do, and so that's just caused a shift in philosophy somewhat, where that also requires us to make or prioritize skilled labor. And by that, I'm really meaning maintenance and repair personnel, mechanics, electricians, technicians, who can bring the skills necessary to maintain and repair that new technology and make sure that it's running as efficiently as possible. And So that's created this dynamic where we still have a reliance on even seasonal or part-time workers, especially during harvest season, that come into our facilities to help us pack things at the peak of freshness, but also have this need to grow this category of worker who maybe we don't need them to necessarily be full-fledged engineers, but we still need them to be highly technical.
That's interesting. I was wondering how your harvest season was going, and if that has been impacted.
Yes, it has been impacted. I think it's not unique to again our sector, where people just have options, and they may not necessarily want to work in a place that's manufacturing food, because inherently, like I said before, there's water involved, and if we're packing peaches and apricots at, like I said, the harvest, we got to get them packaged as quickly as possible to be preserved as fresh, for the consumer. And that means sometimes you got to work at night, and people don't want to work at night. And so there's these different things, like I said before, some longstanding traditions and things that we need to step back and think about how we can adapt to a workforce that we still need, and do things in a improved or best way. Things that were the best practice before may not be the best practice anymore. It may only be an okay or good practice, and we need to focus on the best practices, or else we won't attract and we won't retain.
Thank you. And Jeff, from your standpoint, can you share with us a little bit more about what you're seeing, industry-wide across all these sectors?
Yeah, so I think when you start thinking about immigration, especially from like an academic point of view, and farm labor, they're very closely tied together. It seems like, so most of when you're thinking about farm labor and immigration, it's mostly labor intensive crops, so fruits and vegetables, those types of production going on, where things have to be harvested when they're, as Adam said, when they're fresh and ready to be harvested. And they can typically not be done using mechanical harvesters. The products are too sensitive for the mechanical harvesters to harvest it, particularly if it's going to be sold as a fresh product. Now with canning, that's a little different. Maybe they can take a little bit more bruising. So there's really issues with having enough labor when harvest is on. And some of the solutions, that have been thrown around is, or some way that farmers get labor is through the H-2A guest worker program. So that has a lot of hoops that farmers have to go through to prove that they can't get domestic workers, and that causes additional costs. And they're not always able to get all of the labor they need. And there's, they've been reliant on undocumented workers for many years, but that seems to be also drying up as some workers kind of go back to Mexico or wherever they came from, and aren't returning to the U.S. to work in these fields. So it seems like there's a fairly systemic labor shortage issue, and it really impacts labor-intensive producers, particularly when they're trying to harvest and get the crops out of the ground or off the ground. Some of the solutions that economists are looking at are typically in the areas of expanding the H-2A program, making it easier for farmers to use and implement, and then, assuming U.S. and Mexico keep developing and the labor transitions out of agriculture and there's fewer workers actually in agriculture, how do they actually develop technology so that they can possibly harvest these things without human hands? And so that's really the direction I think most people are focused on and really solving this labor the labor shortage long term. Is how can we harvest these very sensitive crops without relying on human hands? And I think that's, that solution is, people are working on it, but it's not here yet.
Right, and from what it sounds like, that's a long-term solution.
Absolutely.
So how do we help Adam and Joe and their businesses with, the here and now, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask Joe, I'm going to turn it back to you, about some of the things that you've implemented to help retain your labor, because I thought that when we chatted earlier, it was pretty interesting, and gosh, it seems like a lot.
So it kind of it was a problem that we wanted to attack, and it feels like for the past year, I would divide up probably about 50% of my time in the kitchen versus 50% of my time doing office work, recipes, creating new menus, and I feel like there's probably an additional 25% of, all right, hey, how do I figure out how to make this work? So we've, with the labor shortage that we've experienced, we've kind of attacked it in a couple different ways. We've increased wages, which has been something that has just been a necessity out of our business. We've had a lot of increased sales. Restaurants run on very thin margins. So luckily, increased wages have been offset by increased sales. There's a saying in the restaurant business that, sales cure all. And that's been helpful. But what that ends up doing then is it burns out the people that are in the restaurant that are working twice as hard as they might have been 2 years ago. So we've increased the wages. We've scaled down our menus, which from a menu size, say from 25 menu items, which is a pretty small menu item for a creative chef like myself, to about 18 to 19 to 17 to 16. Just depends on the staffing level in these past year and a half. We've got a great ownership and great general manager that allows that flexibility in menu, where a lot of restaurants are, hey, this is the menu, this is what we're serving. We can change every day, which helps a lot with, hey, we're out of this today. Okay, we don't have the labor hours to prepare this. We're going to take it off the menu. We're going to substitute it with something smaller. The other thing we tried to do, in addition to increased wages, is I tried to institute a 4-day work week. It's been kind of balancing back and forth from 5-day to a 4-day. And at this point, with where we lost one staff member, so it's everyone either has 4 days this week and 5 days next week, to try to give whatever benefits that I can provide. I can't increase, certain things, but those are what I have in my control. And that's been kind of how we've been attacking this problem for about 18 months now.
Adam, how do you look at, how many hours people put in at definitely during harvest? Have you altered that at all, or made any shifts that way?
Yes, I think in general, I really like Jeff's comment about, Joe's comment about revising the menu even. And there's kind of like this employer branding strategy that how you hold yourself out now more. Everybody has to be more thoughtful and try to, promote and be as attractive as possible to prospective employees. And I think that includes, modifying a work schedule. So for us, Marcy, to your point, we have this influx of workers and work in the summer, early fall months. And then some seasonal workers are historically, furloughed. And then there's this off season, and we use the off season primarily to repair, maintain, build, install, update, improve. And there's kind of we've looked at it as kind of this balance to say, hey, in the quote unquote off season, you can go on you can have a 4-day work week, or you can have pretty liberal vacation and even sabbatical leave schedules and things, industry wide. And so now what we're we're trying to use what we have in place existing in a more thoughtful branding manner. But we're also trying to say, okay, the cost for this form of compensation, whether it's wages or some other kind of benefit, has to maximize value to our people. And if it's not valuable to our people, it can't be valuable to us anymore either. And we have to shift those costs. Maybe it doesn't necessarily, hopefully, mean adding costs, but it's shifting that cost to a more valuable category to our people. And so that's what a lot of our strategy has been focused on is that cost allocation, but also inherently, to keeping up with inflation and other considerations, we're having to raise wages, but we're just trying to do so in a thoughtful, efficient, and fair way.
That's interesting, Jeff. How else can you, as an economist, really help the industry think of and invent new ways to be able to leverage, the labor force and think about retention? I think that's a critical piece of it as we move into next year.
Yeah, so there's kind of one area of labor that is not particularly prevalent in some of the labor intensive ag products, and that's a lot of domestic workers. Like a lot of them are immigrant workers, and so retention does seem to be an issue as the workers come, so there seems to be a problem with workers coming on H-2A work visas to help alleviate some of the labor shortages during harvest, but then they kind of stay on and transition out of agriculture and into construction because they're more consistent wages. They don't deal with the seasonality of it. So retention does seem to be an issue when we're dealing with the agricultural kind of seasonal labor shortages. We're working on kind of a paper now. It's in very, very early stages where we want to actually survey some immigrant workers and see if there were retention bonuses each year for coming back, if that would keep them from shifting out of agriculture and stuff like that. So we want to see if those types of things would actually impact their decision to stay in ag and kind of the temporary employment versus kind of shifting out and moving into other jobs that aren't quite as seasonal.
That's really interesting, and I'm sure that'll help all of us to understand what those opportunities are.
Yeah,
we are coming up on our time here. Did you want to add anything, Jeff?
No, I mean, the paper is going to look at more things than just retention bonuses, but that's kind of an idea of one thing we want to look at. And we're actually planning on going and surveying workers in the field and kind of getting their opinion on how they view various possible retention mechanisms to keep them in the jobs. But that's, very, very early stages. It's kind of just in the planning stage right now.
It sounds like you're onto it already, though. That's really good to know.
Yeah.
Well, we are coming up on our time, and I didn't want to make you stay over. So if you have anything else you'd like to add, Joe, Adam, or Jeff?
We're hiring at ID. Anybody needs a job?
One thing that kind of comes to mind is if wages rise and continue to rise and farmers continue to struggle with labor shortages where they're losing revenues, where they're not able to get the crops out of the ground, a potential thing that could start to happen is farmers are going to shift cropping patterns and maybe get out of labor intensive crops. So that could potentially, if that happens and farmers just decide it's not worth it, they can't get the labor when they need it, they could, that's possibly kind of a more medium run solution is get out of these labor intensive crops and get into other crops that don't require so much labor all at once. And that could possibly, impact consumers and restaurants if prices of vegetables and fruit go up because farmers are just not able to produce and supply them on time at the given wages. So that's another kind of area that academics are looking into as well.
Marcy, my last comment would be that I'm just optimistic and really grateful for the kind of this opportunity in food manufacturing to take a step back, like I said before, and engage with our people, maybe on a level that we haven't, and to implement labor strategies that will make a real difference in people's lives and simultaneously grow our business. And I think that's what we're trying to accomplish. And I think we're gonna get done. We're gonna all find solutions, and so we're gonna come out of this.
Yes, and I think, to that point, Adam, it's how we're all operating, right? We're being smarter about ourselves, our staff, and our families. That is one benefit from the last year and a half or two, I think, that we've all experienced. Well, I have to say we're going to have to wrap this up, and I really appreciate each of you for joining us today. This has been a really interesting discussion.
Thank you.
And, thank you to our audience for joining us on What's Next. Make sure to follow us on all the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. We're there on every platform. So you'll see this link in each one of those, and look forward to upcoming issues. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.